Hello and welcome to our complimentary webinar, which is brought to you today in partnership with Enghouse Interactive, Auscontact's national silver sponsor, and it's entitled Insights from the Australia and New Zealand Contact Centre Decision Makers Guide. In the spirit of reconciliation, Auscontact acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and during that time, with the help of today's special guests, David and Steve, we hope to spark your interest and engage you in the conversation, as well as provide some ideas to take back to your respective businesses. To round off the webinar, we'll be having a Q&A session. I'm Fiona Keogh, CEO of Auscontact and your moderator for today. While we're waiting for everyone to join us, let's use the time to quickly run through some housekeeping. Please remember to interact with us by asking questions, and as you know, there's no need to take too many notes because we'll be providing you with a copy of the webinar. To interact with us, please use the Q&A button on the control panel. You can ask questions or make comments for David, Steve or myself from time to time. Don't forget, we're having that Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so please type your questions as we go along so you don't forget to ask them. Or you can, if you're having technical issues, please note that on the control panel, you can click the raise hand button and the Auscontact team will rush to your aid. Or you can revert to your registration confirmation email, and all the relevant phone numbers and access codes are available there for you. I know that you're all very familiar with asking questions and answering questions as well, but let's try out that Q&A button on the control panel just in case you haven't experienced it. And the question for today is, what is your biggest challenge for your contact centres delivering on your strategy? Now, I'm expecting to see quite a few common things in terms of what people are saying. Goodness me. So let's see what people are saying. Okay, so we're getting budget, the current employment market. Wow, that's going to be very relevant, I think. We're getting senior leadership support. We're getting a whole bunch of different things. So thanks everybody for responding. So we do know that you know how to use that button. So I would now like to introduce our two speakers for today. And they are David Fulcher, Sales Director APAC at Enghouse Interactive, and Steve Morrell, Managing Director at ContactBabel. But before Steve gets the microphone, I've got a little bit more to share with you. The 2022 Australia and New Zealand Contact Centre Decision Makers Guide is ContactBabel's second annual research study of the performance, technology and HR aspects of Australian and New Zealand contact centre operations. Based on interviews with over 100 contact centres and 2,000 customers, it covers multiple aspects of the industry, including HR, operational benchmarking, growth strategy, technology, and customer experience. And to hear more about it, it is over to you, Steve. Welcome. And thank you for staying up all night to do this, by the way.
Not at all, not at all. ContactBabel never sleeps. Hello, everybody. Today, I'm going to be talking about some of the key findings from our new report. So, excuse me, over the past couple of months, we've carried out surveys with 70 Australian and 42 New Zealand contact centres, as well as end user surveys with 1,000 customers from each country. This report will be available for free download next Friday from our website, so you're getting a real sneak peek here. Before we start the presentation, I'd be interested to get your views on where you see the contact centre heading. Is it growing, is it shrinking, or staying the same? So I think we'll go for the first poll question.
Jess, if you could launch the poll question, we get everybody working, because we like to kick off with everybody working hard because there are no free rides. So you get a number of options. So just pick one of the above, which is increasing your head count, remaining the same, decreasing head count, or don't know. And I think based on some of the responses that we got in the original poll, that this is going to be particularly relevant in terms of seeing what the results are. So, Steve, I'm not going to put you on the spot because it might be a little bit different between Australia and New Zealand. If we can just maybe close the poll now with everybody that has voted and share the results, Jess. Aha. So 46% said that they're going to remain the same. 31% are going to increase their head count and 23% are going to decrease head count. And I'm really glad to see that everybody actually knows what they're doing, that nobody doesn't know what's going on. So that gives us a good feeling of being in very safe hands for the next 12 months. Back to you, Steve.
Thank you. Well, we asked this question to our survey respondents, and so let's have a look at what we said. So we've got Australia on the left here and New Zealand on the right. So what we're looking at here is I'll talk you through this. The height of the bars that you can see here, that shows the number of survey respondents whose contact centres had shrunk, remained steady, or increased in agent headcount last year. Now, the different colours refer to the plans for the next 12 months. So green means they plan to grow, yellow, no great change, and red means they plan to shrink. So in fact, what we saw from the poll there was, a slight, I think it was 31-23% in favour of growth. For the industry as a whole, the expectations are far more, as you can see there, especially in New Zealand. We couldn't find anybody that's expecting to decrease headcount, and very few in Australia. So for us, that's a kind of very strong expectation of growth over the next 12 months after more of a mixed bag before for understandable reasons. So this presentation is broken into 4 parts: HR and operational benchmarking first, then digital channels, customer experience, and finally strategy. So let's look first at average agent attrition rates. These are segmented by contact center size: small, medium, large, so sub 50, 50 to 100, and 100 plus. And you can see here that, in common with many other countries, larger operations will tend to have higher levels of attrition. And you can see this is particularly the case in Australia. Give you some sort of comparison, we also look at the UK and US and have done for 20 years. And these figures are really very similar to those found in other territories that we survey. So, while there are obviously issues, especially here, with the larger Australian contact centres, perhaps, this isn't something that, contact centres in the rest of the world, they're also dealing with this as well. I mean, everyone's interested in salaries. So here's a top level snapshot looking at the mean average salaries paid for 4 different contact center job roles. And as you'd expect, the Australia chart on the left again, so that's in Australian dollars. And the chart on the right, New Zealand, is in New Zealand dollars. So what we can see here, not only does Australia tend to pay significantly more than New Zealand, but in fact, what this chart doesn't show, but I know, is that these salaries are considerably higher in Australia than those paid in the UK or the US, particularly at an agent level. There's a lot more detail in the report about salaries by size and vertical market and things like that, but I don't want to go into that in too much depth. We'll look briefly now at a couple of operational benchmarks. Again, I don't want to go into too much depth about this, as there's lots more in the report to get your teeth into. This is just headline figures. This chart shows call duration measured in minutes. A couple of things to bring out here. And again, as we found in other countries we study, sales calls tend to be considerably longer than service calls. And the calls tend to last longer in Australia than they do in New Zealand. And it's kind of impossible to know exactly why this is. But we have noticed a pattern that those territories with a high use of automation and self-service will tend to have longer call durations because, as I'll talk about later, more of the easy, simple calls are not being handled by agents. So that means the average call that they do handle is more complex, and therefore it takes longer. This is a pattern we've seen over the years, a significant increase in call duration over the past 20 years in the UK. It's gone up by about 200%. So next, have a look at speed to answer. critically important for the efficiency and performance of the contact center, and particularly the customer experience. Now, both the Australian and the New Zealand survey respondents report a mean average of over 1 minute, which is quite a long time actually. It's in line with what we're seeing in the UK and the US, but I would note that speed to answer has shot up massively there in the past couple of years, and even hopefully, if I can say post-COVID, it hasn't started coming down yet. We're still seeing issues there. We've also included the median values here to show you the midpoint, and that takes out the impact of a relatively small number of contact centers with extremely high speed to answer. So just whip through the benchmark and then we'll have a look at digital channels in more depth. Let's take a look first at the proportion of inbound interactions coming into Australian and New Zealand contact centres. As you can see, live telephony is coming in at around between 60 and 70% in both countries, which is, again, in line with what we're seeing elsewhere. Telephony self-service only around 5%, but email, especially in the case of New Zealand, is a really key ingredient, it seems, in inbound interactions. The use of the other digital channels, web chat, social media, they've been around for a while. Messaging and video, possibly less long. They're not yet as advanced as what we're seeing in the UK and the US. One of the keys to kind of a big take up in the use of digital channels is the use of automation. And what we've looked at here is how are emails handled? Is it through automation? Is it through completely blank emails started by agents? Are there templates? Or is there some kind of work between the automated responses and then the agents? And we can see here that over 85% of emails are actually still handled by agents. Although, to be fair, the majority of these do have editable templates, which obviously cuts down on time and improves consistency, but only in a very small number of cases, exclusively in the survey within Australia, where automated responses are suggested, which are then checked by agents. This is kind of maybe a bit below the curve from what we're seeing elsewhere. So, to me, this is indicating that although emails are a very important part, as we've seen in the inbound mix in many operations, there's still a very long way to go in terms of handling them kind of quickly and cost effectively, and really, delivering what the customer wants, while also keeping it as getting these digital channels substantially under the costs that a telephone call costs. So this slide looks at how web chats are handled. So we've looked at email, this is web chat. We can see here that Australian survey respondents are much more likely to be using a chatbot to handle web chats than the New Zealanders, although the majority of these do still require an agent to check them before they're sent to the customer. And they're amongst the New Zealand contact centres that we talked with, the use of chatbots is very much lower. Again, putting into some sort of comparison between the US and UK, we're seeing much more of a kind of Australian pattern than we are the New Zealand pattern. So before we start looking at the use of channels and which ones customers prefer to use, these charts show our survey respondents' opinions on what they believe will be the most effective for their customers to use, depending on what they're trying to do. So whether it's service request, sales inquiry, or a complaint. They're quite colourful here, so there's lots of options. So I'll just take my time and talk you through them. We see both Australia and New Zealand. They do show, quite significant similarities. Live agent telephony is always the most popular choice, regardless of the country or what the customer is trying to do. And we can also see that web chat is seen as being very positive for service and sales, especially. Quite a significant proportion of contact centres believe that email is probably the most effective channel to use for complaints. So bear these things in mind when we're going to look at the channels that customers prefer to use when I go on to the next slides, which are looking at the surveys of the customers rather than the businesses. So this is what the businesses think. Let's see what the customers think. So these next three slides, they're taken from the surveys of 1,000 Australian and 1,000 New Zealand customers. And we asked customers to imagine that they needed to contact a company for high emotion interaction. So example, as a complaint, or letting them know that an item that was sent to them was wrong. So nothing too complex, nothing too urgent, but something that, you know, might kind of grind their gears a bit. So we asked them to imagine that and think, well, how would you then want to talk to a company? Not how do you do it, how would you want to? There's a real spread of responses, both from Australians and New Zealanders. So we can see that telephony, ringing the contact centre, is very popular, but also that quite high, we said before that quite a high proportion of contact centres said that complaints would be better handled by email, and this is kind of matched out by what customers are thinking as well, because, you know, it's very, very popular. High emotion interaction, people get their thoughts, they get all their facts down in one place, they don't forget to ask anything, you know, the whole thing's there in an email, and like, right, go ahead and deal with it. So email is very, very popular for high emotion interactions. And to be honest, it's quite a surprisingly high proportion of people that thought that a physical visit to a store or an office would be their number one choice as well. That's probably worth talking about a bit more. So within the report, we break this down by age groups and also household income, and try and see if there's any patterns emerging. I'm not going to labour the point now, but it is interesting, if not entirely unexpected, to find that younger demographics prefer web chat and especially social media, whereas older customers are more likely to call the contact centre or actually pay a physical visit to the store. Interesting thing was we've been tracking this in the UK and US for a number of years, and visiting the store or the office was a very popular choice pre-2020, and funny enough, it dropped off the radar entirely in the last couple of years. It would be interesting to see if that's actually a thing now that comes back, or whether people have trained themselves to, you know, contact companies remotely. So what takeaway from this really, and the kind of the use of this, is depending on who your customers are and who you want them to be, your focus on specific channels should be different, you know, depending on who your customers are and also depending on what they're trying to do. So let's look at the next scenario. That was high emotion interactions. This was high urgency interaction. So we gave customers a scenario that, okay, this is a highly urgent issue. Give an example of, say, you need to collect somebody from the airport and you need to make sure that the plane's arriving on time. So in this case, the contact center is, again, popular choice. 31% Australia, 40% New Zealand. But there's been a real jump here in the use of web self-service, and we've included mobile apps in there as well as the first preference. And interestingly, we did find that, although, you know, us more experienced people, shall we say, wouldn't probably use it ourselves, that social media was a very popular way of contacting a company, even for a high urgency interaction amongst the younger generation. Web chat also quite important, but it's funny enough, social media really seemed to strike a note with the youngest people that we talked with. And the final scenario here, highly complex interaction, such as we give an example of a mortgage application or a tax return. And we see here that telephony was again the most often chosen, although it obviously doesn't get a majority. Physical visits to the office or the store, again, that was, you know, very popular, especially with the older age groups. And email, yes, certainly to some extent, and far fewer customers, as you might have thought the web self-service will be their preferred method for complex requests. So really there's quite a big similarity between highly complex interactions and high emotion interactions, and the urgency is really where the kind of web self-service comes into things. So quite interesting, and especially when you start looking at within the report about age groups and demographics, you think, I could actually use that. So these customer opinions lead nicely onto some of the customer experience related findings in the report. But before we look at this, we're going to have another poll question.
We are, thanks, Steve. So hands back on the keyboard, guys. Which of these factors do you think is most important in driving a positive customer experience in the contact centre? And you can only pick one. Is it first contact resolution, a short queue or wait time for response, that the agents are based in the customer's country. The choice of channels including self-service or polite and friendly agents. Now, Steve, I know you know the answer to this from the survey, but what do you typically see overseas? Maybe if you can share a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is quite a tough question, actually, because all of these things drive positive customer experience, and we've seen it over the years. But there is one there, I'm not going to give it any hints, which really stands out amongst the others.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see what people think. I don't want to push them in one direction. I
No,
just
we
hope
don't.
that they're all right.
Indeed. Well, I mean, there's no right or wrong answer, but there is
Absolutely
definitely
not.
an answer.
I mean, you need all those. A question about the agents based in the customer's country, but that's in there for a reason.
Absolutely. Okay, so if we can share the poll results, I'm really interested to see what the outcome is. First contact resolution by a country mile. 67%.
Absolutely. That's marvelous. That's marvelous. Thank you all so much. Very much appreciated. Otherwise, I'm going to have to cut this presentation very short.
And we don't want that. So pretty much everything else is at the same level. So that is really interesting to see, shall we say. So back to you, Steve, to take us through customer experience.
Okay. So we asked this question to our businesses that we surveyed, and we asked them to our customers as well. So let's have a look at what the businesses said first. So Australia on the left, New Zealand on the right here. We got very different responses between countries, actually, which quite surprised me. Australian businesses believe that the customers place a very high value on first contact resolution. So what we did is, sorry, I need to talk through these graphs, they're quite complicated. So there's 8 options there. I just actually picked the 5 that I thought would probably be the most popular based on what I've seen before. And basically asked people to rank these things 1 to 8. So the greens are the ones, the important ones, and the red ones are those that are less important. Not to say that they're not important, but they're less important. So this is what businesses believe about their customers, and this is how they're kind of aligning their business to meet their customers' needs. So as I say, the Australian business is very high value on first contact resolution, which is something that we've seen there, so that's super. And they also thought having polite and friendly employees, short wait time for a response, and having the issue handled by a single employee were the most important. So far, so uncontroversial, or is it? New Zealand businesses also agree that having a short queue time, polite and friendly employees, they're important, absolutely. But they also thought that having longer opening hours and the choice of channels was far more important than first contact resolution, which was something which I had to say did make me go back and check my data, but it was right. Neither Australian nor New Zealand contact centres believed with any real strength that their customers place any particular emphasis on agents being based in the same countries as the caller. However, this is what the customers think. In fact, especially in the case of Australian customers, this is very far from the truth. So over half of customers place having Australian-based agents as being one of their top 3 factors impacting customer experience. And this is something that we also see in the UK and the US. Businesses underestimate this, and customers actually say, well, to be honest with you, it's really important to us. And that's pretty consistent. Now, apart from this, the Australian businesses that on the last slide, they generally had it right. So they thought first contact resolution, short queue wait times, polite and friendly employees would place highly, and indeed they have. New Zealand contact centres that didn't place great emphasis on first contact resolution were clearly mistaken, as I kind of knew, with 57% of their customers placing this as a top 3 factor. Short queue wait times, it's almost seen as almost as important, and excuse me, having New Zealand based employees is also rated highly here as well. And the longer opening hours that the businesses thought would be really important, that's far less important for New Zealand customers than businesses had believed. And this is something that we've seen over the years, the long opening hours, 24/7. That's become far less important. I think the main driver for that isn't that customers are thinking, oh, gee, I'm very happy with 9 to 5 hours. It's the fact that so many companies have really upped their game with good, effective self-service. so that customers are thinking, well, it's almost like, well, try self-service first, as we've seen with some types of things, and then if that doesn't work, then I'll ring. So I think that's being driven by self-service rather than people thinking, oh, I only need to be able to contact a business 8 hours a day. So let's have a look at the final section here. This is about contact center strategy and growth. So something that's been on, pretty much everybody's mind over the last couple of years, working in the contact center industry, is remote working, because that happened pretty dramatically. So what we're looking at here is, what are people doing now? What are people expecting to do in the future? Again, we've got Australia on the left, New Zealand on the right. And in the main, Australian contact centres don't believe that there's going to be much in the way of major change in the next 12 months. So that around 30% have all their agents in a centralised location now, and just over half have all their agents working in a hybrid model, so sometime in the office, sometime at home, and 14% have everybody remote working. And really, there's not a massive expectation of change there whatsoever. This seems to be something that people seem to be obviously fairly comfortable with, no great plans to change. But if you look there, you've got more than 70% of people working at home at some time, and this is going to create issues, challenges, opportunities, etc. We'll have a bit more of a chat about that later on. For the New Zealanders, contact centres are seeing quite a strong move away from agents doing full-time remote working and moving much more towards a hybrid model. And really the kind of takeaway from this for me is that in both cases, it's clear to see that our survey respondents acknowledge that remote working in some form will continue to be a key part of the contact centre operation moving forward. Who knows what's going to be happening in 5 years' time, but for the time being, there doesn't seem to be any massive rush to get back to an entirely centralised contact centre structure. So this slide shows, or asks the question, what's preventing your contact centre from achieving its aims? And these are the proportion of businesses which kind of believe or agree that these issues are holding the contact centre back. So that we've come up with kind of 5 different things there and asked people to judge how important they are. New Zealand in black, Australia in green. I tried to look at which countries' national colours were. So the big thing or one of the big things for both countries seem to be HR issues. So whether that's attrition, skills, recruitment. Looking before, the attrition rates didn't seem to be particularly unmanageable. They're quite typical for advanced contact center industries, around 20 to 30% a year. Although it's not to say that doesn't cause problems, of course. So it may be stuff beyond attrition. Without delving in, it's impossible to know why. It's possible to know what this is. There's also the kind of age-old budget issue. The lack of investment in systems and processes seems particularly important in New Zealand there. Technology as a whole seen as less of a problem, although it's worth commenting that 43% of New Zealanders say that the siloed channels are affecting service quality, and that's through not being able to offer a full omni-channel experience to their customers, with all the attendant problems that causes. And the New Zealand respondents are also actually quite scathing about the lack of strategic vision shown by their senior management. This kind of suggests that the contact centres don't feel that they're seen as the strategic asset that in fact they deserve to be seen as. So that's something that senior management might want to take a look at. So a final poll question.
Absolutely. Some really interesting data there, Steve. Which of these factors will be most important in achieving your contact centre's goals? And it's slightly differently nuanced question. Single choice: is it agent empowerment? Is it remote hybrid working? Is it the increased use of self-service? Is it moving to cloud-based solutions, or moving from telephony to digital channels? Do I put you on the spot, Steve? Are you going to give the answer away?
I'm not going to give the answer away because I think depending on who's answering the question, there'll be very firm choices, but they can also be very different from each other. I think this is much more one that comes from, the specific needs of the contact center, maybe the size of it, the type of customers they have, the level of technology they've already employed, and what their strategy is for the future. Is it to get as close to their customers as possible, or is it or a lot of the calls actually fairly low value, in which case, self-service is probably the route to go down, what the cost pressures there, etc., and things like that. So this is a much more tough one to kind of predict.
It is. So let's just share what our attendees have said. Agent empowerment, 37%, at least 20% ahead of the other options. Remote and hybrid working at 17%, as is increased use of self-service, as is moving to cloud-based solutions, and at 13% moving from telephony to digital channels. Is that what you expected to see, Steve?
Yes, to an extent. I do think if this had been a multiple choice, if we were able to do multiple choice, then we'd have seen, everything being particularly popular, because I deliberately picked things that I thought, this is going to be quite a tough choice for people to actually figure out which one is going to be most important here. I don't think there's many of those that people could actually say, oh no, that's not important to us at all. But yeah, let's have a look at the next slide and see what the survey said. So we've got those 5 again. I've also put AI up the top there, artificial intelligence, and the reason we didn't include that is because they only have 5 options, I believe, on the poll, and also I had a kind of feeling that it was going to be one of those that certainly wasn't going to be top of most contact centers kind of key importance things compared to the others. So increasing agent empowerment, that's seen as vital by both countries' contact centers, as indeed the poll we've just seen there suggests, and there's particularly strong interest from New Zealand to cloud-based solutions as well. Australia has more of a focus on remote or hybrid working, and the move to digital channels, although right, it's not a headliner there, but it's worth noting that more than half of the people that we surveyed said that this was going to be either important or very important to them to achieve their contact center goals. And as I said, their AI is, while it is important, yes, it's much less important at the moment than other stuff that is possibly has a quicker payback or a more urgent need. So that concludes my presentation of the report's key findings. In a moment, we'll have a kind of panel discussion on some key questions arising from this, followed by audience Q&A. First, David from Enghouse has a few things to say. So over to you, David.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, thanks very much. I'd like to first start by introducing Enghouse. Enghouse is a combination of 2 words, engineering and house, which sort of gives you an idea of the sort of company we are. We're a global company. We're in 120 countries. We've got 1,800 plus employees, and that's growing quite rapidly. We are the Enghouse Interactive, which is the division I'm a part of, is, we develop software solutions and services for communications and contact center space, and have been doing that since 1984. That's a significant amount of time in our business and our industry. The interesting thing about Enghouse is that we have been able to. We're one of the only developers to have developed a local contact center solution, which was developed in Auckland and has been part of our market for a very long time. Our company's very successful in terms of financially. If you look at the market cap, that's quite a significant market cap, and that's grown. It's doubled in the last 3 years. So it's we're a growing, very solid, long-standing company. Steve, next slide, please. Thanks. This particular slide is showing our customer experience, contact center portfolio of products. We have one of the most comprehensive customer experience portfolios in the world. and we've built that over time, as I've talked about, going back to 1984. We enable our partners through the combination of these particular functionalities to build the best tool set to match their customer service strategy or your customer service strategy, and deploy it in the way that you want to. So we have multiple deployment options, but most significantly over the last few years, that certainly has been moving more to a cloud-based deployment option, and our cloud Contact as a service solution is now available locally on an Azure node in Sydney, and that allows our customers to access this broad range of functionality represented in this diagram from one all-inclusive service. And it's the service nature of that that's quite important to this model, where you can just simply access this functionality, which is already there for you to use. You just have to decide to use it as part of the cloud service. Steve. Thanks. And finally, I just want to talk about why Enghouse. We believe strong partnerships that enable amazing customer experiences, as it says on the slide, are really important. But I really wanted to address the sort of the technology issue at the moment, and that is, from a technology point of view, we'll always meet the functionality needs of our customers, whatever they happen to be. Whether you're using a contact center solution or you're using our cloud service, both us and our competitors will always be pretty much functionally equivalent. But what's important from our customers, what our customers have told us, is that they recognize that the functionality that we deliver is important, but what is more important to them is the support that they receive during their activation and in the ongoing use of the service. This type of service culture is one that goes back to 1984 when we were first founded. We've developed a very strong service culture, and it is that value that our customers have told us is most important. Being able to deliver that sort of service and that support will allow our customers to concentrate on their service delivery and do that with the complete confidence that they're backed by a technology provider that has their interest at heart. I won't address all of these particular points, but the one that I did want to just really end on is the competitive pricing that we offer, and the unsurpassed value that we do that through our competitive prices. It's quite important because in times of emergency or high demand, it's really important to be able to use extra agents at a particular time. And that's one of the extra values that we offer, where we offer the ability for our customers to access our bursting capability. So not only are you able to access a very competitively priced solution, but you are able to use more of it when you need to in those times of emergency. So I'd like, just in wrapping up, just to say Enghouse is a business built on one of culture and support. Our functionality of our solutions and services will always meet our customers' expectations, but most importantly, we always put our customers first. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, David. So, Steve, if you wouldn't mind, stop sharing. Yes, we can do our Brady Bunch panel discussion. Love it. Well done. So, Steve, the first question for the panel is to you. And that question is, why is agent engagement so important, and how can we develop this? So we'll hear from you first, and then we'll hear from David.
Absolutely. So engagement's kind of about giving agency environment, the culture, and kind of the systems and processes to reach their potential. Really actively supporting them to help the customers as best they can. So if agents are engaged, this has a big impact on everybody. To be honest, it means happier customers, it means success for the business, it means lower attrition and absence rates. A happier workplace is obviously great for everyone. we wrote a report called Inner Circle Guide to Agent Engagement and Empowerment, and really we have to link those two things very closely together. Engaged agents need to be empowered, and this means businesses have to kind of trust their agents. And with that, there's an acceptance that some of the tight control that we're used to seeing with the traditional contact center model has to be released. Just accept that is going to be lost. However, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It does require a cultural shift. It also means providing agents with the tools, skills, and knowledge to do the job to the best of their ability. Not just like saying, right, okay, guys, go off and do your own thing, and best of luck to you. So we're looking at things like kind of desktop applications that draw on knowledge bases to provide kind of all the relevant information at the right time in one place. We're looking at things like AI-enabled support to suggest answers to agents in real time, rather than people blagging it or winging it, or having to call a supervisor over, or a more experienced agent. And it also means things like giving agents the time they need to handle the query without pressuring them to meet kind of internal metrics at the expense of the customer. So I was a bit wary before when I showed you things like call duration, because that's really quite an old-fashioned metric now. It's useful because it's easily measured, and that's a really good thing. That's something everybody's used to. But kind of call duration and first contact resolution are in some ways kind of, they don't get on very well. So that's certainly worth kind of bearing in mind. And I talk about first contact resolution there, and this is something that is definitely linked to agent engagement and empowerment. I'll talk more about kind of first contact resolution later on, but as we've seen before, it is, most people agree, one of the key factors driving a really good customer experience.
Thank you. David, your thoughts?
It's pretty comprehensive though, wasn't it?
Leave you much? No.
No, not really, not at all. Look, I mean, my thoughts really are that an engaged agent provides better service. It's one that is not concentrating on the sort of the mundane areas of their responsibilities, and are able to engage in much more meaningful, more complex, more challenging. That certainly is something that of course we're all looking for in our lives. So, much more, a higher degree of purpose, if you like, which is really I think quite important. I certainly agree about the retention. It's obviously the impact of losing our employees over these last couple of years with the Great Resignation, as it was called. That was interesting. Bringing on new people, the training, getting them up to speed. Of course, the cost involved in all of that is significant. So having that engagement, a better engagement, ensures that longevity and loyalty of the employee. I'd also say, in terms of our responsibilities as employers, to have our agents more engaged, to give them a sort of a more healthy sort of life with our business, I think is quite important too. And I think having that engagement is adds to that as well.
Thanks, David. Now, Steve, you said we're going to talk a little bit about first contact resolution, and in fact you are, because that's the next question. So what actually impacts the most on first contact resolution? We go to Steve and then to you, David, if that's okay.
Okay, so we've already seen how important first contact resolution is to customers. It's also important for businesses. It's a real win-win metric. You get fewer repeat calls, happier customers, better productivity and indeed profitability. But the first step to improving first contact resolution is really having to kind of understand where the repeat contacts are coming from. At the moment, probably the most popular way of doing this is through agent disposition codes at the end of the conversation, but it's we're kind of moving a bit beyond that now. We're seeing it being investigated through root cause analysis, which uses speech and text analytics to identify repeat calls and kind of the reasons for these, and then it's possible to group those together and connect them to specific processes or issues or products or indeed agents, which your kind of business or training team can then try to improve. I have to acknowledge, though, it's not always the case that it's kind of processes that are broken. Sometimes it's down to a lack of agent skills. Basically they make a mistake. And this can be caused by a lack of training, or, you know, there's also the case, and it's quite difficult to track down sometimes if the wrong information is given. It might be an inconsistent or a kind of out of date knowledge base, for example. And there's quite a lot of solutions which can impact positively on first contact resolution. So I talked a bit about before, kind of AI-enabled real-time agent application on the desktop that can lead them by the hand, if you like. We need to have a consistent knowledge base that's available across any channel. It says the same things to each customer, depending on if on the website, web chat, email, actually talking to somebody. They have to be consistent. And, you know, we look at old favorites like skills-based routing, make sure the call gets through to the right agent. You know, it's a relatively simple thing to do. Been around for donkey's years, but, you know, that still impacts upon first contact. I think it's also worth mentioning self-service here, because what we've seen when you kind of implement an effective self-service system is that the number of repeat calls can actually, sorry, not the number, the proportion of repeat calls can actually go up. And that can be quite worrying. So it might look bad, but it often means that a load of simple questions that don't really need an agent's assistance are being dealt with through self-service, which is obviously great. However, that looks bad if you're actually measuring by proportion, because it means, you know, if the same number of repeat calls are coming in for the more complex stuff, then your first contact resolution rate is going to go down. So I'd say, you know, probably the best way to measure first contact resolution isn't to use percentages or indeed to actually compare yourself to any competitors, is to measure the actual number of repeat calls instead. And unlike the other metrics that, you know, speed to answer and call duration, you can compare like with like across different businesses, I don't think it's really safe to do that with first contact resolution. So it's quite a tricky metric, although it is super important.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, he doesn't leave me much, does he?
Oh, he doesn't leave you. You kick from.
You can go first next time.
You will be going first.
That's funny. No, look, I think for me, I mean, my perspective is obviously not as nuanced as Steve and sophisticated as Steve is. This is what he does, but some of the things I think are quite, you know, from a lot more simplified perspective, and that is, you know, the way in which you communicate, the way through, you know, website, advertising, whatever, the way in which you and letting your customers know, you know, the right gateway that they should be using to engage with you. I think that's one thing, and maybe, you know, should be looked at. I mean, getting to the wrong person or not advising the people, the customers in the right way. That I think has an impact before they even get to engage with your contact center. I think also there are some things. I mean, you mentioned Steve, skill-based routing, which I was going to mention, but that was great. But I think also there are, you know, perhaps there are times in the day when different types of callers are calling. You know, maybe it's older people before lunch, maybe it's younger people, you know, later in the afternoon. Having your agents, you know, from that perspective, you know, being able to take calls, you know, given that voice is still a very high proportion of the type of interaction that we have. I think that's good. Giving you know, people when you know, that can speak to someone of a like mind, if you like. The other thing, of course, you know, as Steve already mentioned, is knowledge management systems, and I think that's particularly key, given the sort of backup systems that you need to have, you know, to back up your agents. But a knowledge management tool, a really good knowledge management tool, I think, is really important.
Thank you. So we're getting quite a few questions coming in, so we'll keep going with the panel, and then I want to make sure that we get to the questions that we're receiving. David and then Steve, what are the challenges? This is your time to grab the microphone, David. What are the challenges and opportunities around remote or hybrid working?
Yeah, look, I think some of the challenges are, of course, you know, the right sort of environment from a remote point of view, to have, you know, make sure that the environment that the agents are in is you know, conducive to work. I mean, for all of us, that's become a thing over the last couple of years anyhow. I mean, I know, you know, some of us are in kitchens, and some of us are in you know, garages, and you know, some of us are in much nicer studies like you, Fiona. But but yeah, it's really about that. Of course, you know, distractions is always a you know, a significant thing now. You know, small children and dogs and things like that. You know, but I think importantly, there's the balance. The challenge is sort of having either under productivity or over productivity, and that balance, that work-life balance too, I think is something that needs to be taken into consideration, and it's certainly a challenge where you've got, you know, because you're at home and because it is natural just to keep working, then you get this, you know, over productivity if you like. Opportunities, well, you know, this is a great time now to be able to, given the unemployment rates that we have both in New Zealand and Australia, you know, are very low. We need to be able to find employees in various environments, and being able to adapt an employee's, you know, work environment to be remote gives us an opportunity now to have, you know, to be able to use a broader range of skills and people that we may not have even been able to use before. So, yeah.
Steve, did he leave you enough?
I'm sure I did.
No, I'll keep it short. Yeah, so kind of the deep talent pool really would include people who hadn't necessarily seen themselves working in a centralized contact center environment before. So that's quite important. Yeah, the opportunities and things like you know, flexible shifts. You can offer longer working hours. You can offer, you know, bring people in for a couple of hours to do a shift when they're actually needed. We don't, you know, they're not sitting there idle otherwise. So that's great. You know, we've got things like reduced commuting, which is positive for the environment as well. Some companies are going to have the opportunity to reduce the kind of size of their contact center, their physical location, and save quite a lot of money on, you know, the kind of rent that way. Couple more kind of challenges really. I think it's more difficult to kind of onboard and train and coach remote agents, especially those people who haven't worked in the contact center environment before. There's a danger of becoming isolated and disengaged. So really a hybrid model in this case will work better. And I think there's an opportunity for a hybrid model to really bring in the best of both worlds. You know, the team feeling, the training, the coaching, the one-to-one and things like that. And on the opposite side, you know, the kind of flexibility, the work-life balance as well. So, yeah.
Thanks, Steve. I think we might just go to some audience questions.
Yeah, good idea. Yeah.
We've got people keying away. So I know you partially covered this, Steve, when you did your presentation. But Sean wants to find out a little bit more about whether there is a vast variance for age demographics in terms of the channels that they're interested in using. You did mention younger people.
Yes, absolutely. It's not the case that, you know, kind of 80% of young people want to use social media. When I'm saying there's a difference, I'm looking at it from a more statistical, you know, geek point of view. So it might be 10% for younger people and 1% for older people. So those are the kind of things we're looking at. Yes, there's a difference with some age groups, age demographics, but it's not, you know, massive swings like that. But it's certainly, you know, what we have to remember is we're in this for the long term. If the younger generation now are wanting to use social media, or, you know, a sizable minority are wanting to use digital channels, then, you know, as they move through the age groups, if they're getting what they need from those, then maybe they'll stick with those channels. It's not the case that, you know, when those guys are 50 or 60, that they'll suddenly want to, you know, run down the road to the office and talk to somebody. They'll still be happy to use social or web chat or whatever we will have then. So I think it's really a case of breaking. We can see there's kind of a break from the traditional way of I will go to an office or I will pick up the phone amongst the younger generation, definitely.
Absolutely. So another one for you, Steve, because there's a really laser-like focus in on what the survey report's going to share. And Tonya would like to know, do we have any insights regarding Net Promoter Score, both from interaction with the contact centre and staff engagement within the contact centre?
Well, this wasn't covered within the report, unfortunately, but from what I've seen elsewhere in other countries, Net Promoter Score within the contact centre is seen as being exceptionally important by senior management. It's rated somewhat less important by the actual operational management. So when we look at for example, one of the questions we ask in the UK and US, we have a more established survey, we can ask people longer surveys and longer questionnaires. What's the key metric, the key customer experience metric that your senior management look for in order to judge the success or otherwise of your contact center? And the two things by a long way are customer satisfaction scores and NPS. First contact resolution, sorry to bang the drum about this, but that's maybe in 1 or 2% of cases, despite the fact that's the thing that actually drives the customer experience and customer satisfaction the most. So they're not looking at how can we create more customer satisfaction, and looking at that metric, they're saying, right, what's the end game? So, and for me, I think if you're looking at that, you're looking at the end customer sat score, or indeed NPS score. You're knowing what, but you're not knowing why.
Cool. David, have you got any insights from Enghouse with any of your customers, without mentioning customer names, regarding the correlation between CX and EX, I guess, is, simplifying it? Are your businesses measuring that are your customers?
No, I mean, I don't, to be, frank up front. I would though say, I still think that the, net promoter score, or voice of the customer, or all of the different things that we try to measure in terms of the current tools are helping with, AI tools and things like that. They're of course extremely useful, and as Steve says, they're in his surveys they're the most important. But I do agree though that they still don't answer the why. Why did the customer mark that poorly, or what are you doing well, and how do you replicate it? I think that they still don't answer that question.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got a couple more questions, so we have to be really succinct in our answers. So Steve, is there a specific time frame in which a repeat call should be defined? For example, if it's received today and then again in 6 months.
Right, I'm going to refer you to another report of ours, Inner Circle Guide to First Contact Resolution, where you'll find all of these things answered. Is that succinct enough? The only thing I'd comment on here is, when you're measuring first contact resolution, the really super important thing is just, when you're measuring at the beginning, make sure you measure the same way at the end or as you go on. Consistency and measurement is the absolute key thing, rather than saying it has to be after 7 days or 2 days or a month or something like that. As long as you stick with the same metric, you can't go too far wrong. It's when you start chopping and changing throughout it, then that's when you're not comparing apples with apples then. Yeah.
David, are you seeing anything from your customers in terms of what or how they're saying they're measuring FCR in terms of timeframes?
No, this is all a bit too too detailed for me. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I mean, we do see a lot of people doing post-call surveys and saying, was your call, was the reason for your call resolved? And of course, there's fulfillment that needs to be occurring, which doesn't happen during the call. So how can the customer truly answer that question? So there you go. And one last question really quickly from William. And this is for you, Steve. I don't know whether there was a further deeper dive within the survey on whether there are any further insights regarding onshore agents. He said he's always found that understanding the customer and the problem to resolve the issue is more important than where the agent is based.
Absolutely, yeah. And when I think, because I'm always a bit uncomfortable about putting that question, but it is important to the customers. So I think what we're actually driving at there, again, the short answer, no, there's not anything more in terms of insight. But from the stuff I've done elsewhere, that's very much the case. And unfortunately for many businesses, the offshore agents don't have perhaps the empowerment, the training to actually be able to run with it and to do exactly what they need to. So I don't think it's the fact that that's your physical location or the nationality that's the issue. I think it's the fact that, for whatever reason, they don't have the same abilities, whether it's through systems or processes or training or whatever, in order to actually solve that customer's issue first time. I think that's where the frustrations come from.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And a lot of it has to do with the contracts that we build with our outsourced partners. So with that, I cannot believe it. We are at the hour. So if I could ask you first, David, for your closing remarks, and then you, Steve.
Yeah, look, thank you very much. It's been really educational today. I mean, to have Steve here to do this, I've learned a lot. It's information that we can, we will take and use in our engagements with our customers to be able to, improve the way that we interact with them. And I think being able to add this level of knowledge to my team and the Enghouse team, I think is really, really important in creating a really, a much more trusted partner relationship with our customers. Yeah.
Thank you, David. And Steve.
Yeah, thanks very much for inviting me. It's been really interesting doing this research survey. As I say, we've been doing stuff in the UK and the US for 20 years now, so it's interesting to, really get some cool data on entirely new countries. And in fact, although there are, significant differences between, the UK, US, Australia, New Zealand, in fact, there's a lot more similarities, I would say. So it will be very interesting to see how, the countries progress and they move on over the years.
Thank you. Well, huge thanks to Enghouse Interactive for bringing ContactBabel to Auscontact as our national silver sponsor. To you, Steve, for burning the, early morning oil. I hope you're doing this in your jammies somewhere. And to everybody that has attended today, thank you for your questions and your active participation, and we will see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you might be. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.